LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hope you had a great week, of course. It's a common question that I ask, and I've certainly hope that you're good. I'm glad that you're here, of course. And so we want you to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you can be aware of new updates to our podcast. And of course, visit us on Facebook. Join the revolution, as Franklin calls it. Join us on Facebook for our community there. We talk about all kinds of things and where you can share your triumphs and your trials and just simply ask questions there if you wish. And you can also reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And I'd love to get suggestions for future shows. Perhaps you'd like to be a guest. Perhaps you have criticism of the show, of course. And then, I would be open for just corresponding with you, and sometimes your questions is something I can do a future show about. So definitely email is the way to reach me. Sometimes people are reaching me via Messenger. It's not my favorite mode of communication, so definitely try to reach out to me on email. Of course, this is if you've been following along, this is our fourth and final installment of our really in-depth. Remember, this is a Pest Geek Podcast family. We get geeky here. It means we sometimes get really down into the roots. And so we are really glad to have Dr. Niam Quinn with us. And so this is part 4 of my interview with her. And there she discusses issues about a feeding trial that she's been doing. And also, we talk a little about Rattus Tanazumi, which is, so the question is do we have roof rats, Rattus rattus in Southern California, or do we have Rattus Tanazumi? Is it a different species that's there? Well, I don't have an answer. I don't think she has an answer either, but things are intriguing down there. So when she's doing that feeding trial, she is discussing how they're looking for whether there's rodenticide resistance that's beginning to occur with animals. And so they're investigating whether that's happening and whether some animals are going to be more susceptible than other animals, because that's going to be important because of all the restrictions that are coming down on rodenticides. And so we kind of need some of that data, and she's been working in that particular area. Again, Dr. Niam Quinn works at the University of California Cooperative Extension, and her title is Human Wildlife Interaction Advisor. So, and she's located down in the LA County area. I think she's responsible for 3 counties. And so this is part 4, our final installment this year for this particular our interview. She also deals with one other topic, and that's the West Coast Rodent Academy. It's probably going to be filled up by the time you hear this particular podcast, but you might want to keep an eye out for her next training event, which will occur in November of this year, 2023. So if you're very interested in getting some hands-on practical training in rodent control, you might want to check out the West Coast Rodent Academy, and just Google it up online or search for it, whatever favorite search engine browser you have. I'm sure it'll come up. But that's going to be Dr. Niam Quinn's work there, and so it's certainly going to be something worth your time. So why don't we, without further ado, let's get started in listening to our 4th and final installment with Dr. Niam Quinn.
And you can they also have like these massive open spaces, like just right there, right? It's like city, and then you can go fishing, you can go kayaking, the stunning scenery, like you can climb up mountains and look at the ocean, but it's surrounded by urban, right? It's surrounded. Yeah. And so then you get that's when you get like all these coyotes, and you get like all this human wildlife conflict issues. And like what's interesting about Southern California, and I would say that this is quite different to other areas in like, especially in like where you are, right, is that like you got people that love coyotes and you've got people that hate coyotes, right, and they live right next door to each other, right? That's and right. So trying to manage that kind of thing is really difficult. Like, yeah, you know, we've had like 3 or 4 bites on humans already this year.
Oh,
We had a mountain lion that bit a kid that CDFW wouldn't go on private property because technically the mountain lion didn't break any kind of code because there's no code that covers like attacks on humans. Like there is code that covers attacks on livestock, but and like it's so
no,
bizarre. Like
there's out of all the laws that California creates all the time, they don't have a rule that says if a mountain lion kills somebody, you
I mean, I
kill.
just find it so like I
That's
find that
bizarre.
so bizarre. Like I'm not saying that you should like that mountain lion like I don't believe that mountain lion should be hunted, for example. Like I
Hmm.
mean, I'm not against hunting, but like I mean I mean there's a lot of them in the state of California, but there's just not a lot of them in a lot of places in the state of California, if
Okay.
that makes sense. Now, I don't think we need mountain lions in downtown LA. But like I mean, I think there's certain areas where the populations do need protection. But if it bites a person, that's
Yeah,
it. Like, I
that's
mean, it's not the
amazing.
person's fault. Now,
Was the
granted, when
person
people
wasn't
get,
trying to feed it? It wasn't.
yeah,
It
like
was.
when people get bitten by coyotes, sometimes those people do deserve it, to be
They're
honest
trying to
with you,
fight. They're trying to
right?
feed
They're
it.
trying
Yeah,
to
they're doing something
like
stupid.
pet them. Their dog's on a retractable leash. Like, I'm not saying that it's okay, but like
Yeah,
sometimes people are kind
yeah.
of asking for it.
We have stupid tourists that come here to Montana and they'll do stuff with buffalo and
Yeah.
things happen and usually
And
the human loses.
people are just not educated. Like it's
Yeah.
funny, like I go to the park with my husband, right, who knows nothing about wildlife, right? Except
Yeah.
that he doesn't want them eating his cherimoyas in the backyard.
Okay.
Um, and so I see people feeding like wildlife, and I said, that is just so bad. And
That's
he's like,
stupid. Yeah.
these signs are all wrong. He's like, they just say don't feed wildlife. They don't tell you why you
Why not
don't,
to feed
right?
them?
And so
Yeah.
like that's really good for me to hear because and that's something that I talk about a lot when I talk about rodent management. I start off about why you manage rodents, not how you manage rodents, because and I think that's important for a wildlife professional as well. Like it's not like how to do it. Most people don't even really care. They
Mhm.
care why you have to do it.
Right. Right.
Right? Like the disease, the structural issues, like all like the allergens, like and people forget that all the time. Like mice and rats it's not even a disease issue anymore for
Mhm.
inside structure. It's they're causing early onset of asthma in
Yeah.
centralized
Yeah.
children, right? And asthma kills people, right?
Sure.
Or
Oh
if it
yeah.
doesn't kill them, it makes them very, very, very sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like
Are
it's
you are you seeing anything with plague with your roof rats in Southern California?
not, so roof rats don't have fleas. They have a
What?
flea bird. I know, right? And that's
How,
also, well,
how
I know it's also because who caused the Black Death, right?
well that
Black
the
rat.
roof rat gets blamed for it, right? So what you think it was the Norway rat that did it? Oh, here we go. Well, that's
We
going
know
to
more
upend.
about polar bears than we do
We
about
do about
rats.
rats.
So,
Oh my gosh, yeah. I was always the
so
roof rat was the one that caused the Black
I mean, the
Plague.
Norway rats in Southern California, we have an issue with them because we have an issue with typhus. So, like possums,
Right.
like, I'd rather have a rat in my yard than have a possum. Possums are just dirty. They have salmonella.
Yeah.
You could have 1,700 fleas in a possum.
I have a soft spot for
Yeah,
possums. I like possums, but
they're kind
they're
of
they're
ugly.
basically a four-wheel drive gas trash can. They are
They're
just
they're
amazing.
they're
But
kind of
anyways, we don't have
they're
them in
ugly fleas.
Montana, so we unfortunately, but I always thought they were cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
but no, we never, like almost never find fleas on roof rats in Southern
that's
California.
amazing. How is
And
that possible?
so the theory is it's to do with the humidity of where they are living. So they're not generally a burrowing
Right?
rat. And so
Sure.
there's not enough humidity for the fleas to survive. That's the
Oh.
theory. That's the theory.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, because they'd be in trees, they'd be in vine bushes and shrubs, and that's that just blows my mind.
See what I mean, Stephen, right? We don't like I think we know. Like that's what I say to people at the end of my talks. Like the more I learn about rats, the more I realize that we know nothing. Like
Oh my
nothing.
gosh.
Right. And so like it's things like that. Like we never get fleas, but we do get a lot of mites. Now, do we know anything about mites?
No,
Not
I mean,
really.
other than they
Right.
can
And
kind of
so
make you a
well, we
little
don't know
crazy.
because they could carry diseases too, and like it's really obvious. And like as someone that has played rugby and is a big rugby fan, I always call it cauliflower ear
Okay.
And so you get it in the scrum and rugby from like bashing in the cartilage on
Right.
your ear all the time. Like, luckily
Yeah.
mine survived. But you get that kind of like bumpy, kind of weird, lumpy thing on the side of the ears, and that's mites, because mites are so small, like often you can't see them, but that's a
Okay.
classic sign of mites, is this, kind of roughed around the edge, kind of
On a person or a rat?
on a rat, on
On
a
a
rat.
rat. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I did not know that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, wow. Okay. Well, this is, I'm looking forward. So I'm thinking perhaps in another year, we got to catch up again to see where some of your research is going
Yeah, and
at
we've
this
got, I
point.
mean, we've got the rodenticide research, we've got the bait station research. We'll hopefully have some diet research if we can get some money for it. And we haven't talked about the rodenticide resistance research.
Right. Right.
We're
Are you
doing that.
doing that chemically? Are you doing that through a genetic, looking for some genetic markers, or are
So
you
both,
both? Okay.
actually. So, it's kind of complicated. So what we are doing is, so what we have done through a pilot study with Orange County Vector Control is we have found the what we call the Y25F mutation in this VKOR gene, which is essentially the resistance gene, right? And I'm not a geneticist; I'm actually terrified of pipettes, but I'll try and explain it in the least
Sure.
scientific way
Sure.
possible. And so we found this mutation, which actually codes for resistance to second generation anticoagulant rodenticide.
But not first?
No, second. So
Interesting. I
second.
didn't
So
realize. Wow.
bromadiolone to be precise, and maybe difethialone, but bromadiolone for sure.
Okay.
But just because it has the genetic mutation doesn't necessarily mean that it is resistant. So,
Right. May
and
not
if it is
express.
resistant, it doesn't mean that the rodenticide doesn't work. It just means that it could be less effective.
Yeah, I think that's
So,
an important point most people forget about. And that is
yeah,
resistance doesn't mean proof.
no, exactly. And so what we're trying to do is we're actually getting rodents from urban areas, ag areas across the whole of California. So I'm working in collaboration with Roger Baldwin at UC Davis. And so Roger's kind of focusing on the ag samples. I'm kind of focusing on the urban samples. Obviously, we have a lot from Southern California, but we're trying to get some from some like more like, I don't want to say rural towns because they're fairly large towns, but like more rural areas that have
Yeah.
towns in like
Yeah.
Northern California, like places like Redding or like Eureka on the coast, like
Okay.
places like that. So trying to get those samples, maybe Fresno, some urban samples from Fresno as well. And so, what we will do is so we get the rats, we process them, we send them to NWRC, which is, it's like NWRC is just an amazing, like, it's just such a great tool for me, but like
Yeah.
for Americans in general, like the research that comes out of NWRC is it's incredible,
Yeah.
right?
But
So
their funding has been under pressure too.
yeah,
So
and so, but like we work together to get funding so I can help like support them,
yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
we're funded by California, but we funnel money
Through
to
them.
them so they
Yeah.
can do the research that we need. So Toni Piaggio is the geneticist up there, and we're working with Toni to, we're not exactly looking for, so we are looking for things that we know cause resistance, but we're
Hmm.
also looking for other things that people may not have found before, right? So there's like these mutations that may cause resistance, but we don't know. And
Okay.
so we'll look at that and we'll find them. And then when we find them, what we have to do is we have to go back to the populations, and
And
then
look
we have
again.
to recover the rats. And then our toxicologist, Catherine Horak, who also works for NWRC, I think that place is just full of giant brains, Stephen.
They got a lot of smart people up there.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so what we will do is like, and I think Catherine will probably may have to physically help us with this, but we have to like some sort of like cryogenically preserve the livers of these like potentially resistant rats. And
Okay.
then through the magic of science and pipettes and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff over in Catherine's wheelhouse,
Yeah. Yeah.
like Catherine is able to use the liver and the rodenticides to see if the rats are functionally resistant,
So the blood
right?
liver may be processing the rodenticide
It's
faster than it kills them.
yeah.
Right.
And so
Okay.
right, and so there's that. And then like if we find that they're functionally resistant, then the next phase, which we don't have funding for, but the next phase would be then probably full on feeding trials, right?
Yeah.
Where you go and you recover animals and you drive them to Colorado, and
Yeah.
it's done more times than you would think, where
Sure.
there's been
No, no. Yep.
animals caught in the field and driven to Colorado. But
Yeah.
like it's a really great tool. And then so we would know then like the susceptibility of the rats to the individual active ingredients.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
like Catherine will always already have given us an idea of this particular mutation does code for resistance. So Jake wants to say hi.
It would be, yeah, it would be nice to get some more recent data, especially when you're dealing with roof rats, about those LD50 levels with the more late with the better chemistry and lab studies on some of that. It would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like LD50 is really complicated, and you could hear me speak 100 times. I may never mention LD50,
Yep.
Stephen, because it's such a complex thing, and I think it's something that, and like I don't think it's anything to do with the intelligence of the industrial professionals. I think it's actually more to do with the comprehension of the people that they explain it to, right?
Yeah.
Like their customers can't understand that, like just because there's an LD50 doesn't mean that there's an LD1 to 49 of animals that have also died from much smaller doses.
That's right.
So I tend to stick
It's just
away, like
it's just
stay
an
away
average.
from,
Yeah.
right? I
No, it's
tend
an
to stay
important,
away
and
from,
I think it gets missed because I see things on Facebook at times, and they'll say, "Oh, this won't hurt the dog. You'll have to eat so much of it," and it's like, well, is it a healthy dog? Was it how much did the dog eat? How much does the dog weigh? I mean, so there's a whole lot of things involved there to LD50, but it's just it's a whole rule of thumb, and
it's
sometimes you
it's the
see some
10
of the
pints.
parameters with
It's
some of
the
the
10 pints, Stephen. It's the
yeah,
same as the 10 pints,
yeah,
right? You
totally.
could have a dog that eats, like in and around the LD100 and still survives, or you could
Hmm.
have a dog that eats the LD1 and dies there and
That's
then,
right. That's right.
right?
That's
And
because
so,
half died before you got to the top half. So
yeah.
yeah, it's a blunt instrument to be sure, but you have to start somewhere.
I
But
mean, I think really what we need is we need more people. Like if we could get more students that are, interested in rodents, interested in more applied work. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be really focused on wildlife damage management, but like I have students that are really into the applied stuff, and then students that sometimes don't really understand like why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, it's very interesting, but like it's just it really is important to connect the dots, as in like the industry, as in like the manufacturers, distribution, the scientists. And like we have so many entomologists. They're all
yeah,
great people, but we do not need any more
well,
entomologists.
they're the only ones who can get jobs. I mean, this is why it's a frustrating thing that I see is when you look at a lot of these extension jobs, for instance, what are they looking for? They don't say vertebrate. Do you have any experience in vertebrates? Like, do you have an entomology degree or do you do weed science? And
Mm-hmm.
that's it. And that's what they're looking for.
And
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 so,
and then when you are employed, it's hard to get funding. Like there's not like I have to be really creative about my funding
mhm,
sometimes, like because like not people aren't going to fund me over and over and over again. Like other people deserve chances, but then
right.
I feel like there's also chancers that understand that there's not
Yeah,
enough rodent research that
there's
are
none.
entomologists and
Yeah.
maybe don't necessarily really like a bug and a rat are not the same thing.
No.
And I don't think that I would never study invertebrates because they're not, and there's not enough rodent people to stand on our toes. Like, so I think it's great that other people are doing research, but I think that
Yeah.
like you need to understand the problem. Like, you can't just be going out there and being like, oh, hey, we need a bit more information on this. So I'm going to reach out to this group and hope that they give me money. Like that's kind of a waste of money if you don't really understand the problem,
Yeah.
or if you're
We need
not
more.
connected to the other researchers and know kind of what's going on in the different areas. But like you said, like just because it's happening in California, right? Like is a roof rat in California the same as a mouse in Montana? Probably not.
No. No.
Is it not relevant at all? Well, also probably not, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think that there's like steps to each problem, and then some of them are like some of them you can solve like holistically, and some of them you need like individual research in the area. Like, is rodenticide resistance different in California than it is in Montana than it is in thing? Like you said, like there's so little information about paramyscus, like our paramyscus,
Hmm.
like and then like there's even things like there may be another like roof rat like species in the United States, right? And so like that's another thing that we're looking into, and like we have evidence that there is a genetic difference between these two rats. Are
Oh
they
yeah, I've heard
right?
that. I'm so tired of the splitters. I usually try to ignore them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like
So
we have this genetic evidence, but we're like, does it mean anything? I
does it
can't.
mean anything? Right,
I
right.
am there's two people in the US that have worked with Radis Tanizumi that I know of, right?
Okay.
I'm one of them,
All right.
right? And then Katie Swift that works with Leafitech is another one.
So do you think that there is a different that there's two roof rat species here in in the United States? Put your money down here, folks.
I what I need is I need more
Commit.
money to do a whole genome
Oh,
sequence.
the academic thing. We need more research.
So like and I don't really understand it because I'm not like
Yeah,
genetics, like I'm a field
yeah,
researcher, so genetics aren't really totally my wheelhouse. Like I understand bits of
right.
it as I get involved in more and more projects, but like if so the DNA that we test is maternal DNA. And so
Okay.
your maternal DNA gets passed from generation to generation to generation. So like that a rat, and we call it rattus what the fuckus, excuse my language. Just and that was a term that was coined by someone, and I don't know who to give credit to, but I just think it's hilarious. Um and we don't know what it is.
Right.
And I like, for example, like Katie, who's worked a lot with Radis Tanizumi when she worked with US Fish and Wildlife on different like atolls and all these
Okay.
like exotic little islands and whatever for rat eradications that do have lots of Radis Tanizumis. Like I put them out for her, and so I knew from the genetic information like which one's which, and she couldn't tell the difference, right? And we've also
Yeah.
had them sent to one of our colleagues at the Cal State Long Beach, who was like one of my favorite rodent nerds that I've ever met, and she did like some like basic morphometric stuff, and she couldn't really see any differences in size or color or anything like that. Now we had a small sample, but on the genetic side we have a split, right? We have animals that are clearly Rattus rattus and animals that are clearly Rattus tanizumi. However, because we're only testing maternal DNA, if that animal's mother was a Rattus tanizumi like 1,000 years ago or whatever, it will show up, and that's what we could be detecting. And so we need the whole genome to be able to say this is not a Rattus rattus, this is a Rattus tanizumi.
Are there
So
any
maybe
physic? Can you tell them apart if you put two of them side by side? Can you tell them apart?
so it's really hard to find it, but like when I've worked with Radis Tanizumi and they're kind of orangey, right? I mean, that's
Okay.
the only way I can describe them. And I my parents are so proud of me sometimes. They think my job is absolutely ridiculous, right? And so I'm out in the field and like we get our rat, we put it in a pillowcase, we lift it up with the pillowcase, and then we fold the pillowcase back. And this thing comes out of me, and me and my staff are like, what the? And it's got this big orange blob on its belly. And hopefully my risk person won't actually ever listen to this, because I just got my finger and I spat in it. And I got to the belly of the rat and I went like this. And I go, no, it's not dirty. Definitely orange.
Oh,
Like,
wow. Okay.
and I was like, what is that? And so we've gotten a few as well where like they're really orangey, like under the arms and kind of like
Yeah.
at the edges of where their fur changes color.
Okay.
And so like I don't, but then we put all the rats out and we can't tell which one's which, right? So we have the
Yeah.
genetic information, but we can't tell the difference between them.
Yeah. I'm,
And so
I'm
what's
not
the
a,
so what's
yeah.
the significance too, right? Now the
Yeah.
significance is that they could be very behaviorally different.
Yeah.
It could be
Okay.
that the rapid expansion of roof rats across the United States is actually not roof rats, it's actually Tanizumi,
Okay.
right? If that's the case, then Tanizumi are not on any rodenticide labels.
Well, I have an answer for that because I've made the same complaint about voles
Yeah.
to the EPA. You know what their answer to me was? Well, that's an unenforceable part of the label. I said, do you know? I'm thinking to myself, they've undercut my. I'm an educator, of course, and what do we always say? Label is the law. Label is the law. Label is the law, right? Until it's not. Now, so, but basically undercut my whole thing. So I'm like, well, why don't you just simply put on the label then voles
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
put the species on it?
And like we don't, and like I don't know what the significance is, and we're not spending a whole lot of money, to be honest with you, on this either.
Well,
But it's
probably
kind of one of those
you don't need
interesting.
to have a new problem in California, do you? I mean, that would
No,
be the
not
other thing.
not really, but like it's interest. Like, what if they're more resistant, right? I mean, like there are a couple of things, and but we don't know, right? What if there are different like management mechanisms? What if they have different diseases? There are other things. Excuse me, but we're not spending a huge amount of time on it.
Right. Well, that's something, well, it's certainly going to be a question that we're going to have to get answered if that's the case. I don't know. It's wow, we've covered a lot of territory here. So we want to really be grateful for the kind of time. I've been here 2 hours, so it's an amazing thing. This will be at least two shows, maybe three. I'll have to see how I'm going to split it up. Well, Dr. Quinn, we want to really thank you for participating with us here. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Really glad to have you on board. Dr. Quinn is Niam Quinn. She's the Human Wildlife Interaction Advisor for the University of California Cooperative Extension. You can definitely check her out online. She's been doing a lot of work in the area with roof rats, or maybe what's the other species you talked about here?
The polite name or the scientific one?
The scientific name, because Rattus Rattus is the one for the roof rat that we think it's there.
Tanizumi.
Rattus Tanizumi, right? So, do I have to add another section in my book? I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to bother with it. Maybe I'll have to mention it. So we're really glad to have you on board. We've been talking about coyotes. We've talked about roof rats and bait stations and in your training event here, your Western Rodent Academy, right?
West Coast Rodent Academy.
Is it West Coast Rodent Academy? Yeah. West Coast Rodent Academy, which is probably going to be filled up by the time you listen to it, but you want to probably get on any type of mailing list, or better yet, bring it to your location. She's happy to discuss that possibility with you, either providing you the training or pay to have her come out and help bring her people and have you do it with her, because it's a 3-day event and very useful. I haven't gone to this one. I've certainly watched portions of it. It was certainly, there's some information there you want to get a hold of to be sure. So really glad to have you with us. And so you've been listening to Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.